All right, let's open our Bibles. We're in Numbers chapter 27. Numbers chapter 27. Let me first of all answer a question. I had a question this week, email from one of you, asking if I was any closer to setting a date for going to Israel. I want to tell you that I am going to try to put this together for next February. Okay, that's as close as I can tell you right now. But I am going to try to go to Israel next February. I've only been when it was hot. I would like to go when it's cool. Next year, Lent is later than usual. Ash Wednesday does not come until mid-March. And Easter, late April, almost as late as it ever can fall. And so I think February will work out, before we get into the Lenten season. So if you're interested, I don't have a price yet, haven't gotten that far, but I will be negotiating, for the best we can. And still, I don't want you to wait a whole lifetime to go to Israel and then the food not be good, or the bed's not good, or the air conditioning doesn't work. So we've never gone the cheapest way you can go. Let's put it that way. It will not be the cheapest way. We will try to get, really good hotels and good meals. I simply mean by that lots of choices every way that we can. And I will have a date and a price soon. But if you need to plan things way ahead, and I understand that you do, if you're getting vacation time and so on, right now I'm thinking a 10-day trip in somewhere near the middle of February. Okay. 10 days, middle of February. If you want to go along with me to Israel, I would be glad, of course, for you to do that. All right, let's pray before we start. God, this book of yours is sometimes really difficult, sometimes easier. We count on help from those who spend adult lifetimes studying one or two of the 66 books within the big book. And we also seek the guidance of your Holy Spirit to help us find those things that are forever true about you and about us, how you initiate right relationship with us, and if we appropriately respond, if we receive your gift, we may know ourselves set right with you by your grace that we've come to know best of all in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Okay, this time through the Bible, we're just looking for the greatest passages. But what I'm trying to do, when I say greatest, I don't always mean that everything we're going to read is equal. Some will be greater than others. What I'm trying to do is to help lift up passages that I think make all the rest tie together. We're looking for a theme that goes through the Bible, and I believe there is one. I believe there are things said about God and about us that are forever true, that are found book after book after book, and that's what we're looking for. Now today, after we deal with chapter 27, and we're going to do that first, then we're going to jump to Deuteronomy. And so I want to remind you how the Torah was put together. And this is not just my thinking, nor is it just Christian thinking. It's good Jewish belief as well. When Gail and I were invited to have dinner at Rabbi Charles and Nancy Sherman's home with Rabbi Zimmerman the Friday night before he began the series here, the two rabbis were, remembering people they know in common, people with whom they were in school, and people who are now, of course, the age they are, or some who've already gone to be with God. One of those names that they mentioned, I was listening to this part of the conversation at my end of the table there, was Gunther Plaut. And I have commentaries on the Torah written by Gunther Plaut, and he was a classmate. These two guys know him well, and Rabbi Gunther Plaut has written some of the very best commentaries on the Torah for the Jewish community. And what I'm going to remind you is that Rabbi Gunther Plaut also believes in J-E-D-N-P. The people who don't believe in J-E-D-N-P are the folks who talk about the inerrancy of Scripture and so on. The non-denominational folks, as a rule, are the most conservative within any of our denominational groups. Best scholars, all 13 Methodist seminaries teach J-E-D-N-P. All 4 of Reformed Judaism seminaries teach J-E-D-N-P. So what I'm telling you here is generally acknowledged as being the way the Torah was put together. So what we have here are stories told around campfires to begin with. I've told you that we have no evidence in any museum in the world that the Jews were a written people before the time of King David. We have nothing written by a Jew before the time of King David. And King David's time is easy to remember. 1,000 before the Common Era. The city that he established, Jerusalem, celebrated its 3,000th anniversary in the year 2000. Okay, so that we can pinpoint. Nobody writing from the Jewish community that we have in any place in the world before that time. So an oral tradition. Now, Rabbi Zimmerman just reminded you and me that the people mentioned in the Bible before Abraham and Sarah were not Jews. He kept saying Noah was not a Jew. These people before Abraham and Sarah were not Jews. They were not Israelites. The Jewish people count their history from Abraham and Sarah, and we can pinpoint them pretty closely in history, roughly 1800 before the Common Era. Okay, 1800. So the stories then were told about Abraham and Sarah, Ishmael and Isaac, and all those succeeding ones that we've been through around campfires for hundreds of years, about 800 years. Okay. We believe that those stories were told differently, slightly differently, among the northern tribes and the southern tribes. And by north and south now I mean once they settled in Canaan again. When they settled in Canaan, after Joshua gets them across the river, the story is still told for 200 years. 200 more years until David comes along in the year 1000. Okay. So after David's time, we believe, when he set in motion the new capital city, the new palace, a new temple, though Solomon got both of those things accomplished, the Yahvist stories were put down somewhere around 950. And the Elohist stories were put down about 50 years later. And the stories were meshed. And as Zimmerman pointed out again, one of these talks about the holy mountain, calls it Horeb, one calls it Sinai. One calls God by the old name, El, Elohim, almost entirely, and the other one has already started using Yahweh, the Ye Asher Eye, the I am who I am. But there are other similarities, differences. In the J stories, you have God often just walking up and talking to people. This is the more primitive one, scholars believe. Morning, Adam, how are you? I'm fine. How are you, Eve? I'm doing well. Later, as people start saying, now wait a second. Did God really just walk up and speak to you and you heard, well, no. Then how did you hear God? Well, in visions and dreams. And so in the Elohist stories, you have a lot of visions and dreams. Joseph was a dream interpreter and so on, you recall. All right, so those two. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to get to Deuteronomy. And I've told you that the scroll of Deuteronomy is not mentioned anywhere in the Bible until the reign of a king named Josiah. 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 And I'll talk to you about what was going on in the reign of King Josiah that made this scroll, we believe, come into being. Priest simply means the educated people who were educated to lead the Israelites religiously after the temple got built. Once there was an established temple in Jerusalem, after Solomon got that done, the priests became a very well-written people. We have lots of material, you see, after that, produced by the priest. And so we believe the priest tried to put these two accounts together. And sometimes, even when they didn't mesh completely, they just bumped them up against each other. So that you have Moses' father-in-law being called Jethro in some places and being called an entirely different name in others. Same fella. You have the story of Noah. Noah wants you to build a ship, get 7 of every species on board. Did you hear me? I want you to get 2 of every... You remember that. Okay, so we believe that this story is told around the northern tribes, 10 sons, now many generations down the road, but the 10 sons not favored by Jacob against the 2 sons favored by Jacob. So you have stories around one set of campfire, stories around another, and then they're put together. The priests were trying to make all these stories finally hang together, to make a continuous narrative, if you would. So we believe the priest put in a lot of the connective material, and he begat, and she begat, and he begat, and he begat, and he begat, and you get all these long lists of people, particularly in the scroll of Numbers and so on. The priests, of course, are very interested in ceremony. And so in the book of Leviticus in particular, things priestly, you have what the priests wear, what the robes look like, exactly, the tassels and the color they are, all those sorts of things of the priest. So I'm about to show you in chapter 27 of Numbers why scholars believe that ended the Torah at the time, and then you have Deuteronomy coming along later. So look with me at Numbers 27. Because this seems like an ending to Moses' life. And Deuteronomy starts all over. Look at verse 12 with me. Okay, when we get to the word Lord, I want you simply to remember that this is the translation always of the name given to Moses, the burning bush. So I may call it the I am who I am, the I will be who I will be, which is a legitimate translation as well, the I am becoming who I am becoming. I may call it Yahweh, which was another way of shortening into YHWH, as Rabbi Zimmerman pointed out very clearly to you again while he was here. Okay, so that one, the Yahweh said to Moses, "Go up this mountain of the Abiram range and see the land that I've given to the Israelites. When you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was." Remember, Moses had a brother Aaron, who became the first high priest, and a sister Miriam, and now all the family's dying. And Moses is going to die too. "When you have seen it, this land I'm going to give you, you also shall be gathered to your people, because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin when the congregation quarreled with me. You did not show my holiness before their eyes at the waters." If you recall, what happened there was the people were whining and complaining that Moses had just led them out in the wilderness to die, that they would have been far better off to have stayed in Egypt. At least they had something to eat and water to drink, and they keep remembering Egypt as being far better than it was. They've forgotten all the bad, remembering only whatever was better. And Moses is really put out with them. God says, "There's water there at that rock over there, Moses. Touch it with your staff." And in a fit of anger, Moses whacks the rock and water pours out. Okay, this author believes that was the reason God didn't let Moses go into the Holy Land. Rabbi Zimmerman said that later rabbis, and he means by that hundreds of years later, rabbis in Babylon in the 6th century. So 600 years after Moses, rabbis are still debating, why would God not let Moses go into the promised land if Moses was such a good man? Why did God not let him go in? And he told you that some of them finally decided it must have been the fact that he did kill an Egyptian. that he was a murderer. And as David was a great commander and a man of blood, the Bible says, God didn't let him build the temple because he was a man of blood. Well, that perhaps God was really unhappy with Moses about killing that Egyptian back there. Wasn't there some way he could have just, knocked him down and run or whatever he needed to do without killing him? Because striking a rock in anger and the water pouring out doesn't seem to be reason enough for God to have not let Moses go into the promised land. This author sees that as the cause. Okay, verse 15. Moses spoke to Yahweh, saying, Let Yahweh, the Elohim of the spirits of all flesh, and spirit, remember, is Ruach, that is, the I am who I am, is the Elohim of the Ruach of all things that have breath, flesh, appoint someone over the congregation who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of Yahweh may not be like sheep without a shepherd. In other words, Moses doesn't quarrel with God about that. Okay, God, if that's what you think, then find somebody really good. So the Lord said to Moses, Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the Ruach, and lay your hand upon him. And this laying on of hands continues in our confirmation, continues in our baptism in the Methodist Church, continues in ordination of all of our clergy, this laying on of hands. Okay. Lay your hand upon him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. They need to know Joshua is going to be the one. Skip to verse 22. So Moses did as the I am becoming who I am becoming commanded him. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole congregation. He laid his hands on him and commissioned him as Yahweh had directed through Moses. Boom. End of the story. You have more chapters here in Numbers, but then it gets down to things, again, that interest priests. The offerings and what you wear and how you offer proper sacrifice and so on, which really has nothing to do then with Moses turning over the reins of power to Joshua. End of story. Moses is going to get up on the mountain, see the land promised it, and die. Okay, let me just remind you, and we'll go through this again when we get to the end of Deuteronomy. I thought Zimmerman had a great take on that, and that was that he said he has personally been to the top of Mount Nebo 6 times. At least what we think is Mount Nebo. Beware of guides who say, we know this is the spot. Because in places mentioned in the Old Testament, places mentioned in the New, often they cannot be absolutely for sure. I mean, nobody put a sign up there saying, this is Mount Nebo where Moses died. And there are lots of hills. Lots of hills there. So they believe this is most likely Mount Nebo. So Zimmerman said, I've climbed up Mount Nebo 6 different times. Even on clear days, you cannot see all the way to the Mediterranean. You cannot see all the way to the Sea of Galilee. You cannot see all the way down the Negev desert. So obviously, whoever wrote this knows you can't see it, and he means what he mentioned, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. meant when he said, I may not get there with you, but I've been to the mountain and I've seen what's on the other side. And Rabbi Zimmerman said he believed Moses has been shown in his heart. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren will stretch from this point in the north to this point in the south, from this point in the east to that point in the west. And Moses saw it in his heart, and then he died. Okay, let's go to Deuteronomy, all right? I don't think there's anything of great consequence in the rest of Numbers for you and me. Nothing relevant to us. Let's go to Deuteronomy. And let me remind you what was going on when this scroll is mentioned for the very first time. There were enemies always against those who lived in the land of Canaan. Let me go back just a second here to our little map. As Rabbi Zimmerman reminded you, that's not the one I was looking for. Yeah, let's do this one. As he reminded you, there were four great trade routes. Or you can count them as two if you want to count just two sort of X-shaped ones. If you want to count those arms, then there would be four. You had all the trade that came out of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. Okay. And of course today they have oil, but back then they had very expensive, wonderful things that we read about the Magi bringing to Jesus, gold and frankincense and myrrh. So there were great caravans of trade that came out of the south and east. From Egypt and northernmost Africa, the great trade routes that came here. All right, to go around the Mediterranean Sea this way, and as the time of the Roman Empire, by that time, the Romans had built a highway, a road, all the way across to ancient Byzantium, modern-day Istanbul. Ancient Byzantium, a great highway, all the way to Rome. And so these trade routes, could go west, but they also went east into what is today Syria, what is today Iraq, what is today Iran, ancient Babylonia, ancient Persia. Okay. So, the great trade routes crossed here, and all met at a place, a little valley called Megiddo. And so, John, in his revelation, believed the final great battle of history will be fought at the Armageddon, the hill and valley of Megiddo. When you go there today, there's nothing. Because we no longer count on camels to carry everything through that part of the world. We have ships that ply the great oceans of the world. We have airplanes that can fly anywhere and everywhere. And today Megiddo is a dusty little spot. They've made a major dig there that goes all the way back to the time of King Solomon when he built a major garrison and a fort there to help protect him from some of the enemies to the north. All I'm reminding you of right now is there were always enemies for anyone living here in the land of Canaan, because these great trade routes of the world crossed right here. All right. So, at one point in the 8th century, before the Common Era, a strong power arose, and as in Europe, where boundaries have been shuffled any number of times through the years, when the Austrians were the strongest, when the Germans were the strongest, when the Italians, the Romans were the strongest, the Greeks were the strongest. The lines have shuffled many, many times. Well, in the 8th century, one group had expanded itself here and was called Assyria. Assyria. You know that today, modern-day Turkey bumps up against the modern nation of Syria. Turkey and Syria border come together up here north of Israel. And so this territory became a huge power called Assyria, and the Assyrians then swept southward and destroyed all of the northern tribes' territory. And I told you, and if you are able to go along with me next February, if this all works out for us, and if you're able to go with me, one of the places you'll see is a place right on the bank of the Mediterranean called Caesarea, named for the Caesar, Caesarea. And here at Caesarea, you still have the ruins of the Roman theater, 2,000 years old. You have the ruins of the aqueduct built by the Romans to bring fresh water from the hills that go right down through the middle of the country over to the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was a more pleasant place to live, by and large, particularly in the summer, because you got breezes off the sea and so on, and the Romans could defend it. So Caesarea was an important place. And I've told you, and perhaps we can see when we're there, that there have been digs around Caesarea for a long time, and it was an archaeological team led by a professor at Southern Methodist University that found at Caesarea this black line, carbon dated to the 8th century before the Common Era. And that's when the Assyrians swept south and destroyed the 10 northern tribes, burned everything that would burn, and there the ruins. You can see it, and they point out to you they've carbon dated it to that period. All right, it was during this time when the 10 northern tribes, we say they disappeared, the lost tribes of Israel, because the 10 northern tribes finally just gave up and intermarried. So many of the women were raped and plundered and so on, and they ceased to be a separate people. Ceased to be a separate people. It was at that point that the priest in Jerusalem, we believe, decided we have got to turn our people back to God. We must get back to the covenant relationship we have with God and do what God has commanded us, or the same fate is going to befall us. And one morning, when you get to the history books, you're dealing with Judges, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, that during the reign of King Josiah, the priests came in and say, we were cleaning out a part of the temple last night, and look what we found, a 5th scroll of Moses. And Jewish and Christian scholars, the best of both, believe ink was still wet on the skins when they brought them in that morning. It was an attempt to get King Josiah to take seriously what they had produced. If Moses wrote it, he had to take it seriously. And King Josiah did in fact attempt a major reform based on the book of Deuteronomy. All right. So Deuteronomy, when the Hebrew Scriptures, when there came a time after the Greeks had swept around the Mediterranean world that more Jews could speak, read and write Greek than could speak, read and write Hebrew, down in northernmost Africa, in Alexandria, the Septuagint was translated by Jews, Hebrew into Greek, the Septuagint. And the Deuteronomist, at that point, the scroll of Deuteronomy, those who were translating said, well, an easy way to remember the name of this book is, it's the law the second time around. So here, I've told you this before, I just remind you that in Greek, this word, we've gradually over the years flipped the E and the U in duet. But in Greek, it's deutero, two, or second. When we talk about the scroll of Isaiah, for example, we talk about Isaiah, the first 39 chapters, and then a different writer, Deutero Isaiah, and then a third called Trito Isaiah. All right. So Deutero 2, or second. Nomi, here on the end, is Greek nomos. It's the plural form of nomos, nomia, it is in Greek, which means the law. The law. And so we're about to see, if you've forgotten since our last trek through Deuteronomy, we get the Ten Commandments and everything all over again. So it's Moses' life and Israel's relationship with God told again from a fresh new perspective that is fresh in the 8th century before the Common Era. Okay, clear about that? All right, let's turn to Deuteronomy then, and you'll begin to see how, in fact, the priests, and we don't know their names, we don't know individual names at all of those who produced the scroll of Deuteronomy. Chapter 1, these are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness. Remember, wilderness is desert. Okay, verse 3. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the Israelites just as Yahweh had commanded him to speak to them. Verse 6. Yahweh, our Elohim, spoke to us at Horeb. Look, see, it's the other name for Sinai. And back in J and E, those two sources in the Torah, they're used one by one source, one by the other. Same mountain spoke to us at Horeb, saying, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Resume your journey and go into the hill country. Skip through that next little bit, which is not important to you, but the latter part of verse 7, the land of the Canaanites and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I have set the land before you. Go in and take possession of the land that I swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them and their descendants after them. Okay, notice again that Rabbi Zimmerman believes that the holy mountain... I've lost my page again. Why do I keep doing that? Usually, and I say that if you were to take a trip to Israel and want to go down into the desert, I don't intend to go down there myself next February, but if you were to go down into the Sinai desert, you would come to one of the many hills down there. You and I don't see, they're not Rockies, they're not the Alps, but they're hills, they're mountains, if you would, and they will tell you that is Sinai. That's Horeb. And there's a famous monastery there called St. Catherine's. And the monks have been there for nearly 2,000 years after they fled into the desert. And they have a very rare, expensive now piece of artwork that was brought all the way from ancient Byzantium, Constantinople, down when the Ottoman Turks took over that city, and they were afraid it would be destroyed, and they brought it all the way down to the desert to hide it at St. Catherine's. Okay, so tradition holds Sinai's here. Zimmerman said, it's over here. So you'll find, people that see it different ways. All agree that eventually they come this way at Canaan. They come from the east, moving west, and end up crossing at Jericho. But whether they stayed here 38 years, as Rabbi Zimmerman believes, or they spent more time out here, as some other scholars believe, cannot be proven today. We don't have enough data to prove. But I just want you to remember that's what he thought when he was going through that geography with you. Okay, look at verse 19. Then just as Yahweh, our Elohim, had ordered us, we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrible wilderness. And that means desert again. Look at verse 21. See, Yahweh, your Elohim, has given the land to you. Go up, take possession. As Yahweh, the Elohim of your ancestors, promised you, do not fear or be dismayed. Now stop and think. If scholars are right, that Deuteronomy was not written at the time of Moses, not even at the time of David and Solomon. It's written at the time of King Josiah, right near the end of the 8th century, 721. After the Assyrians have destroyed and absorbed the 10 northern tribes produced in the south, try to reform. So why go through all of this again? Well, because you don't know who you are if you don't know where you've come from. That's the idea. You don't know who you are if you don't know where you've come from. And so the priests are reminding, even though this has already been told in Exodus, it's being told again now in Deuteronomy. Verse 22. All of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead of us to explore the land for us and bring back a report to us regarding the route by which we should go up and the cities we will come to. The plan seemed good to me, and I selected 12 of you, one from each tribe. They set out and went up into the hill country, and when they reached the valley of Eshcol, they spied it out and gathered some of the land's produce, which they brought down to us. Now, by down, at this point, it means it went up into the hill country. Remember, there's a spine sort of hills right all along through Canaan here. There's hills in the deserts as well, but not nearly so dramatic as here. And when I say dramatic, I mean Jerusalem's 3,700 feet above sea level. Not 10,000, not 12,000, but hills nonetheless. Nice hills right down through here. So they've been sent up into that land of Canaan. Okay. Verse 25, they brought back a report and said, it's a good land that Yahweh our Elohim is giving us. But you were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the command of Yahweh your Elohim. Now notice here, it doesn't go into nearly all the details that we had in the earlier telling. It doesn't say there was a majority report and a minority report. That 10 thought we could not, 2 thought we could. The Deuteronomists see it as being, the report came back, it's good, we can do it. You see that? It's a change. The Deuteronomists are trying to put a positive spin on the story if the older one is more accurate. If it is. More likely, the older, more likely, that there were 10 who said no, 2 who said yes. Here, it just said, they brought back a report, said it's a good land. Verse 26. But you were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the command of Yahweh, your Elohim. You grumbled in your tents. I like that, at night when they get into their own little family groups and let the flap down. They're mumbling in their tents against Moses and against God. In your tents you grumble and said it's because Yahweh hates us that He's brought us out of the land of Egypt, to hand us over to the Amorites, to destroy us. Amorites were just one of the main tribal groups. Where are we headed? Our kindred had made our hearts melt by reporting, and now comes that negative part of the report. The people are stronger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified up to heaven. Wow. We actually saw there the offspring of the Anakim. And Anakim is an old name for giants. Giants. It's almost childlike. Out there somewhere there are Yetis. Okay? There are Yetis out there. Abominable snowmen, snowwomen sort of thing, There must be some huge giants in this land that are far bigger than we are. Well, guess what? They're in Canaan. This is speaking as if Moses is writing, I said to you, have no dread or fear of them. Yahweh, your Elohim, who goes before you, is the one who will fight for you, just as He did for you in Egypt, before your very eyes, and in the wilderness, where you saw how Yahweh, your Elohim, carried you, just as one carries a child, all the way that you traveled until you reached this place. But in spite of this, you have no trust in Yahweh, your Elohim, who goes before you on the way to seek out a place for you to camp, in fire by night, in cloud by day, to show you the route you should take. Now, when Yahweh heard your words, He was wrathful and swore, not one of these, not one of this evil generation shall see the good land that I swore to give to your ancestors, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh. Caleb was the most outspoken in the minority report, you recall. He shall see it, and to him and his descendants I will give the land on which he set foot because of his complete fidelity. From the Latin, fidelis, faithfulness. Faithfulness he is exhibiting, to Yahweh. Even with me, Moses is saying, Yahweh was angry on your account, saying, you also shall not enter there. That's a different take. Why didn't Moses get to go in? Because he couldn't get them across the first time. He's a part of that generation that couldn't make it happen. When they came the first time up to Canaan after being rescued by God out of Egypt, Moses couldn't make it happen. So he's not going to go either. Joshua, son of Nun, your assistant shall enter there. Encourage him, for he is the one who will secure Israel's possession of it. And as for your little ones, you have to read a little further. I don't think that it's so relevant to the latter part of verse 39. For your little ones they shall enter there. To them I will give it. They shall take possession of it. But as for you, journey back into the wilderness in the direction of the Sea of Reeds. So it's verses like that that cause Zimmerman to think, Sinai is not over there, it's over here. Because the Sea of Reeds is over here. So that's where, he gets that thought. Again, Moses is seeing the promised land, but not going to be led into the promised land. And the whole scroll of Deuteronomy will be finished before we get right to the death of Moses. Right to the death. So this is a recounting of what we've already read in Exodus, but with a different perspective, written from the 8th century after the 10 northern tribes have been decimated. chapter 3, verse 23. I'm skipping around, just looking for the best. At that time, too, I entreated Yahweh, saying, look at verse 25. Let me cross over to see the good land beyond the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. And Lebanon, you recall, is still just north of Israel. So when he talks about the Lebanon, it's right on up here, immediately north of Israel. And he mentioned the Euphrates River, and it and the Tigris flow through modern-day Iraq, as you recall. Okay. But Yahweh was angry with me on your account. So here, you see, from the Deuteronomist perspective, they're already trying to figure out, why didn't Moses get to cross over? Because God was so unhappy with the people whom God couldn't get to come along. So Yahweh said to me, enough from you. Never speak to me of this matter again. God said, I don't want to hear it. It's decided. You're not crossing over. Neither are they. Go up to the top of Pisgah, one of the mountains, and look round you to the west, to the north, to the south, to the east. Look well, for you shall not cross over the Jordan. But charge Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, because it is he who shall cross over at the head of this people, and who shall secure their possession of the land that you will see. So we remained in the valley opposite Bet Peor. Okay. I don't want to hear any more about it. God said, I don't want to hear any more about it. Chapter 4, verse 21. Yahweh was angry with me because of you. How many times is he going to need to write that? The Deuteronomists are convinced Moses was a really good man, the best who ever lived, the clearest revealer of God. So there had to be some reason God didn't let him cross the river, because of all these stiff-necked people. He vowed that I should not cross the Jordan, that I should not enter the good land that Yahweh, your Elohim, is giving for your possession. For I'm going to die in this land without crossing over the Jordan, but you are going to cross over to take possession of that good land. So be careful not to forget the covenant that Yahweh, your Elohim, made with you. Okay, think about it. The Deuteronomists are writing for King Josiah. Primarily for King Josiah. And if he embraces this scroll, then, of course, they will teach it to the people as well. And this scroll continually says, you must not forget the covenant. And guess what? They have forgotten it. And so it is really begging the king and everyone else to not forget. Not forget. Turn back to what made you what you were. Be careful not to forget the covenant that Yahweh your Elohim made with you, and not to make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything that Yahweh your Elohim has forbidden you. For Yahweh your Elohim is a devouring fire, a jealous God. Let me remind you of one other thing quickly here. I've said it before, but I want to remind you. Gail and I were watching a special several months ago now. It was talking about the trek, and, there's very little evidence of a mass movement of people through the deserts back in those times. It's been obliterated. Whatever there was, basically gone. But Israeli archaeologists, not Christians, Israeli archaeologists said that where they have made these archaeological digs, all the way to the failure of the South will fail. Babylon will destroy them. But there's a big difference. They never, ever became Babylonians, as the northern tribes became Assyrians. So these writings did make a difference. The writings of the great prophets that came out of that period did make a difference. The people did survive in Babylon as a separate people. A unique people. They did not become Babylonians. But this archaeologist team was saying, as we've dug down, we have found that in every ancient settlement of Israelites, there are evidence of these pagan gods and goddesses of fertility, all the way to Babylon. After Babylon, no more. Until the 6th century, they continued to hold on to both Yahweh, your Elohim, and Baal, and all these gods and goddesses of fertility as well. They hedged their bets. It was so tough in Babylon and so essential for them to understand that only the most faithful would survive as Jews. They might survive as Babylonians. They would not survive as Jews unless they finally got rid of all those other gods and goddesses. And these archaeologists said they did. At that point, they did. Okay. But not when the Deuteronomist is writing, and not in the time of King Josiah. They've still got them, and the Deuteronomists know they've still got them. Okay, verse 25. When you have had children and children's children, and become complacent in the land, and what does the Deuteronomist know? This has already happened. They have had children. They have had children's children. They've had grandchildren. They've had generations and generations from the time of Moses. Almost 500 years, 721 from 1200, almost 500 years have passed, and they've done all these things that are here. They're writing as if they're predicting, but it's happened. If you act corruptly, it ends. Now skip to verse 27. Yahweh will scatter you among the peoples. It's happened to the northern tribes. It will happen to the southern tribes. Only a few of you will be left among the nations where Yahweh will lead you. There you will serve other Elohim made by human hands, objects of wood and stone that neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. From there you will seek Yahweh your Elohim, and you will find Him if you search after Him with all your heart and soul. Not too late for those who were in Assyria. Not too late for those who will be carted off to Babylon if they seek the Lord. And you love that solo that goes, if with all your heart ye truly seek me, ye shall surely find me, thus saith your God. Remember? Verse 30, in your distress, when all these things have happened to you in time to come, you will return to Yahweh your Elohim and heed Him. Oh, King Josiah's poring over this and thinking, oh my, this is what we need to do. Because Yahweh your Elohim is a merciful El. He will neither abandon you nor destroy you. He will not forget the covenant with your ancestors that He swore to them. For ask now about former ages, long before your own, ever since the day that God created human beings on the earth. Ask from one end of heaven to the other, has anything so great as this ever happened, or has its like ever been heard of? Has any people ever heard the voice of a God speaking out of a fire, as you have heard and lived? See, it's written from Moses' perspective. Or has any El ever threatened to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation, as God did, of course, from the Egyptians? By trials, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, by terrifying displays of power, as Yahweh, your Elohim, did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? To you it was shown so that you would acknowledge that Yahweh is Elohim. There is no other besides Him. I mean, are they laying out their case wonderfully well? I think they are. It's wonderfully well written. How can Josiah do anything but attempt reform? Verse 37. Because He, and here it means Yahweh, your Elohim, because He loved your ancestors, He chose their descendants after them. What is that saying? He loved your great-great-great-grandparents? Well, He loved you too. You are their descendants. You are chosen. You are chosen people of God. He brought you out of Egypt with His own presence by His great power, driving out before you nations greater and mightier than yourselves, to bring you in, giving you their land for a possession, as it is still today. So acknowledge today and take to heart that Yahweh is El in heaven above and on the earth beneath. There is no other. Keep His statutes and His commandments, which I am commanding you today for your own well-being. Look at that. Well-being? That's the word shalom. I'm commanding this today for your shalom and that of your descendants after you, so that you may long remain in the land that Yahweh your Elohim is giving you for all time. That's the problem in Israel today, you see. There's more than one group that believe this land was given to them forever. Israel is told here in one of the scrolls of Torah, again, God gave this land to you. Remember when the movie Exodus was made, and that song that went right to the top of the charts? This land is mine, God gave this land to me. You remember? Yeah, that was a theme song of the movie. All right, so here are the Deuteronomists writing in the dead of night, trying to prepare something that will turn the king's heart and mind. Chapter 5. Guess what we have? The Ten Commandments. The Deuteronomos, the law the second time. And they're almost identical to what you have in Exodus. I mean, they're 10. Some of you asked me after the rabbi left, what did he mean that your commandments are not the same as ours? All he said was, we don't number them quite the same. He didn't say we don't have the same 10. We don't number them quite the same. And we put more into, we simply divide them up differently. And it's not the last 6, it's the first 4, where we divide them up a little differently from the way the Jews do. But there are 10 of them, and they are the same for Jews as they are for us. Just the way we would assign our Roman numerals, if you would. Let's look at chapter 5. Moses convened all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances that I am addressing to you today. You shall learn them and observe them diligently. Yahweh, our Elohim, made a covenant with us at Horeb. There again, that other name, not Sinai. All right. Verse 6. For us, this is the way we number them as Christians. Number 1. I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other Elohim before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the sea. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, who I am, your Elohim, am a jealous Elohim, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who reject me. And he means simply by that, sin does have consequences. And children, though they may hate what's being done to them or not done for them, tend to perpetuate the mistakes of the parents. Tend to. And psychiatrists and psychologists call this scripting. Scripting. You have a script, you live it out. My grandmother Biggs met my grandfather Biggs when he had already been married and had children. His wife had died. He raised his children, didn't feel it was fair to ask another woman to raise his children. When the youngest one was ready to be on his own, he went to the mercantile one Saturday and met my grandmother who had never been married. 20 years older. They ended up having 5 daughters and 1 son. All 5 daughters married men 20 years older. It was the script. It's what they grew up knowing. A father 20 years older than the mother. And that's what they married. Not always to good result, but that's what they did nonetheless. So it's called scripting, where we tend to do what was done to us. Children who grow up being abused more likely become abusers. Tragic. True. God doesn't make that happen. It's simply that sin has consequences, and children who are not given love and care as they ought act out the way they were treated, often becoming just what the parents were. Children of alcoholics are more likely to become alcoholic. Children of drug abusers are more likely to abuse drugs. Whole thing. Okay. Children of womanizers. I mentioned Sir Winston Churchill's grandson last week. He died. The BBC's obituary, not mine. The BBC was saying what a miserable childhood he had. His mother, they said, was a philanderer. She was sleeping with guys all over London. Finally, an American politician wanted her. Averil Harriman, you may recall, married her in time. Pamela was her name. The father finally had enough, divorced her when this little boy was only 5. He was sent away to boarding school. His name was Winston Churchill. So he would say later that other little boys would catch him in the dark and punch him and say, "Take that, Winston Bloody Churchill." He had a miserable life. So what he grew? He grew up and became a philanderer, like his mother. Okay, that's what this ancient text is trying to say. That sin is seriously, and it has consequences. So you have to be really careful, because you not only mess up yourself, you mess up your kids and your grandkids. Verse 11. Well, no, it's 10. Let's just do 10, because that's the key here. But showing steadfast love, and here's this wonderful Hebrew word, chesed. Showing chesed. The one word used more than any other in the 39 scrolls of the Old Testament to give you the very heart of God. It's chesed. Steadfast, never failing love. Showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation. Remember, 1,000 was the biggest number they had. Zillion, we could say today, or whatever. To the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Verse 11, we usually count as commandment number 2. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of Yahweh, your Elohim, for Yahweh will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. And so I've told you, if you go to Temple Israel, Congregation of Nehemiah, you will not hear the name used. In order to avoid misusing, they don't use it, period. They have to substitute, and I told you that there are actually 3 little vowels that were eventually put into this tetragram, and the 3 little vowels were Adonai. And so if you go to Temple Israel, Congregation of Nehemiah, and you hear them speak at all a name of God, it's the substitute for the name. Okay, it's the substitute for the name, and it's what we have in Hebrew in the mosaic in the north end of the Great Hall. We've been through these commandments not long ago, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them again. Verse 12 is what we call number 3. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it set apart, as Yahweh your Elohim commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your Elohim. You shall not do any work. Verse 16 is number 4. Honor your father and your mother, as Yahweh your Elohim commanded you, so that your days may be long and that you may go well. It may go well with you, and going well is this shalom business again, well-being, so that shalom may come to you in the land that Yahweh your Elohim is giving you. And then the next commandments follow quickly. Number 5, you shall not murder. Number 6, neither shall you commit adultery. Number 7. That was 7, sorry. Number 8, neither shall you steal. Number 9, neither shall you bear false witness against your neighbor. 10, neither shall you covet your neighbor's wife. Neither shall you desire your neighbor's house, or field, or male or female slave, or ox, or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Don't covet. These words the Lord spoke. The Deuteronomist affirms what Exodus affirmed. God gave these words. God emblazoned them into the stone. These are God's words. End of verse 22. He, meaning God, he's the antecedent of this pronoun. He wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. Look at verse 28. And the Lord said to me, something else more, verse 31. I'm skipping only to the best parts. Stand here by me, and I will tell you all the commandments, the statutes, and the ordinances that you shall teach them, so that they may do well, and may do them in the land that I'm giving them to possess. You must therefore be careful to do as Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you. You shall not turn to right or left. You must follow exactly the path that Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you, so that you may live, and it may go well with you, and you may live long in the land that you are to possess. Now let me stop. Look at verse 31 again, just a second. I think this is important. Moses didn't write this. It's written by people in the temple in the 8th century. So what's happened from the time Moses lived, roughly 1200, almost 500 years have passed. Particularly after the priests are educated, can read and write. So from roughly 950 to 721, 225 years roughly, 225 years, the 10 Commandments have been expanded. I mean, what do lawmakers do? Well, they correct this law a little bit with a new law, and this one a little bit with a new law, and this with a little bit with a new law, and that's what happened. They ended up with 453. Started with 10, ended up with 453. And what do the Deuteronomists want King Josiah and anybody else who may get to hear these words to believe? They all came from Moses. Moses handed them only 10, but then God said, come here, I have a few more for you. And He's given them 443 more. To Moses, of course. Because if He gave them to Moses, then you have to do them. Because Moses was the best man who ever lived, say the Israelites. All right. Okay, we're going to put a period right there, right there. That's a good place to stop. Chapter 6 will begin next week. Chapter 6, and that'll be March 21. Don't rush off if you haven't been to church. Sit down close to me where I can see your eyes.